Melrose Middle School was quiet that day, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful but hollow. The wind moved the last brittle leaves of April across the old concrete. That afternoon, a girl named Grace Halley, 13 years old, was seen walking out through the front gate. She wore her pleated school skirt, her pink backpack slung across both shoulders. She never came home. 18 years have passed, but for the Halley family, it may as well have been yesterday. The pain never dulled, just got quieter, hiding itself in dust-covered photo frames, in the way her father would sometimes stop and stare through the empty bedroom door, or how her mother still folds a fresh pair of socks every week and places them in a drawer no one opens. Grace was their only child, sensitive, quiet, always writing. She carried a worn brown leather journal with her everywhere. She wrote in purple ink, loved pressing dried flowers into the corners of each page. While other kids were making noise on TikTok or chasing the next trend, Grace sat under the same willow tree every afternoon, listening to Debussy, watching the stars come out one by one. She noticed little things that most adults ignored. The Halleys lived in an old two-story wood frame house at the end of a quiet street. Her father was an electrician, the kind of man who didn't speak much, but was always fixing something. Her mother, a nurse, was strict in a loving way. She had a tired voice, a tired laugh, but she never missed a night holding Grace when she woke from a nightmare. They were a quiet family, but a close one. On the afternoon, Grace vanished. The school bell rang at 4:12 p.m. She followed the usual path home, past the same wooden fence, dragging her old bike beside her. She asked a friend to walk with her that day, but something felt off. She walked slower. She turned around more than once. She looked back at someone in the schoolyard, not out of fear, but something else. Uncertainty. The setting sun hit the edge of her brown collar, casting her in a pale golden glow that made her seem almost weightless. She turned one last time, slowly. Her eyes seemed to want to say something, but she said nothing. Then she turned, faced forward, and walked into the amber dusk. That was the last time anyone saw Grace Halley. It began with waiting, the kind that doesn't feel urgent at first. Grace didn't come home by 5 p.m. Her mother didn't panic. Not yet. She glanced at the clock, made a quiet note to herself that maybe band practice had run late. She reheated dinner, set out a plate for Grace, turned on the porch light. By 6:30, the house felt too quiet. Her father grabbed his jacket and started knocking on neighbors' doors. Hey, has Grace come by? Maybe stop to talk. He smiled, the kind of polite smile parents wear when they're trying not to worry out loud. Nobody had seen her. At 7:15, they called the police. The dispatcher's voice was calm. Too calm. She's 13. Okay. Probably just lost track of time. Maybe with a friend. These things happen. They filed a missing persons report. Promised someone would check in. No one called back that night. By 10:47 p.m., the only light left on in the house was in Grace's bedroom. Her mother sat at the edge of the bed, gently smoothing the comforter, like she was trying to press her daughter's shape back into it. Her father stood in the hallway, leaning against the frame arms, crossed, staring down at the floor. Then the phone rang. But it wasn't Grace. It was the vice principal. He'd just checked the school's voicemail. A parent had called and left a message they'd seen a girl in uniform walking alone down Elm Street at around 4:20. Might have been Grace, the voice said. But she was going in the opposite direction from where she usually walks. That one detail, the wrong direction, hit her mother harder than anything else. Grace didn't deviate. She had routines. She followed them. Always. The next morning they printed flyers, pinned them to every telephone pole in town. The local sheriff assigned a cruiser to sweep the area. Volunteers walked the edges of the forest just past the highway. At school, students sat in groups. Some whispered. Some cried. A few stared off into space like the world had tilted in a way they couldn't name. And over again, one question hung in the air. Why would Grace take a different way home? Nobody had an answer. And that silence, that lack of sense, was what scared people most. At 2:15 the next afternoon, her mother stood outside the school, holding a flyer with Grace's smiling photo on it. A local news station had arrived. The reporter aimed the camera and gave her a quiet nod. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Grace, if you can hear this, sweetheart, you're not in trouble. We love you. Please just come home. Please. Inside the school, kids peeked out from behind classroom blinds. Teachers stood frozen in the hallway, hands over their mouths. Some cried. Others just looked away. That night, most houses on the street turned off their porch lights early. But in the window of the Halley house, Grace's bedroom light stayed on. By the second day, the town had already shifted. Conversations at the diner dropped to whispers when the Halley name came up. The bulletin board at the grocery store was plastered with posters. Grace's photo was everywhere now, smiling, frozen unreal. The police officially launched their search that morning. Detectives visited the Halley home, asking the same questions over and over. What was she wearing? Had she been upset lately? Any changes in behavior? Was there anyone new in her life? Her mother answered each one carefully, then repeated herself when they asked again, as if the wording might change the outcome. Her father sat mostly silent, arms crossed, jaw locked tight. There wasn't much to say. By the third day, volunteers joined the search. People walked the wooded trails with flashlights and whistles. Boats combed the riverbanks. Drones hovered over open fields. They found nothing, not even her backpack, not a single page from her journal, not a shoe. It was like she'd been erased. The media picked up the story. A girl disappears walking home from school. A safe neighborhood. No warning signs. No suspects. No evidence. It was the kind of story people read with a shiver, thankful it wasn't their child. At school, things grew tense. Teachers tiptoed around the subject. Classmates started saying strange things, that Grace had been acting weird, or that she told someone she had a secret. Most of it wasn't true, but people were desperate to make sense of it. Rumors spread fast. Parents started picking their kids up in person. Doors were locked earlier. Kids weren't allowed to walk alone. And still, the investigation turned up nothing. Grace's mother stopped sleeping. She began waking at 2 a.m. every night and staring out the window, hoping for headlights that never came. Her father spent hours in the basement rewiring old radios, trying not to scream. Then came the false lead. A woman from a town 40 miles away called to say she saw a girl matching Grace's description walking through a park. Same height, same hair. She swore it was her. The Halleys drove there within the hour. It wasn't Grace. The girl's name was Emily. She was 12. And she'd never heard of Grace Halley. Her mother fell apart in the parking lot. Her father drove them home in silence. That night, for the first time, they left the porch light off. Time passed, the way it always does in grief, slowly, without shape. After the first few weeks, the headlines faded. The search efforts lost their urgency. What had once felt like a rescue mission turned into something quieter, sadder, a vigil without an ending. The Halley house changed in small ways. The front lawn grew out. Mail piled up in the hallway. Dinner stopped happening at regular hours. Some nights, they didn't eat at all. Friends who had once called every day started calling once a week. Then not at all. Grace's bedroom remained untouched. Her mother sometimes sat in the doorway and just stared. She couldn't bring herself to go in, not even to fold the comforter. Her father kept his distance. He'd moved his tools out to the garage and started sleeping on the couch. Every time the phone rang, both of them froze, but it was never her. Eventually, the police stopped visiting. There was nothing new to report. Every tip led nowhere. Every scent the dogs picked up evaporated in the wind. They kept a file open, of course they did, but it sat untouched on a desk nobody wanted to look at. Months passed, then a year. The community moved on, as communities do. There were new school fundraisers, new neighbors, new holidays. But in the Halley household, time just circled in place. People stopped asking how they were doing. The question had no answer anyway. Then one afternoon, a cold gray day, maybe 14 months after Grace vanished, a woman named Judith came by the house. She worked at a thrift store downtown, the kind with dusty shelves and half-working radios. Judith had once been Grace's Sunday school teacher. She hesitated before speaking. "I don't want to raise false hope," she said carefully. But something strange happened. Her voice shook as she explained, a man had come into the store the day before, dropped off a box of old books and journals. Judith hadn't thought much of it until she opened one of the journals and saw the handwriting. It was purple ink, with flowers taped to the pages. She didn't want to believe it. But something about the way it felt in her hands. She had to say something. Grace's mother took the journal without a word. Her fingers ran along the edge, then trembled at the sight of the handwriting. It was hers, but something was off. There were entries no one had ever read before. Stories, sentences that felt like Grace and some that didn't. And at the very back, tucked into a folded page, was something chilling. A note. The years that followed didn't soften the loss, they just buried it beneath other routines. By the time the calendar marked 18 years, the Halley home had changed its color twice. A new family lived 2 doors down. Grace's bedroom had become a storage space. But the silence that part never changed. Her mother now worked part-time at the local clinic. Her hair had gone fully gray. Her face carried the tired kindness of someone who'd learned to live with unanswered prayers. Her father, long retired, spent most of his days fixing things that didn't need fixing: clocks, light fixtures, anything that ticked or sparked. They didn't talk about Grace much anymore. Not because they'd forgotten, but because words had run out. Until one Tuesday morning, a young woman named Lila entered a second-hand store on the outskirts of town. She was looking for props for her photography project, something vintage, something textured. She pulled an old box off the top shelf. Inside were books mostly torn or moldy. At the bottom, almost stuck to the cardboard, was a small leather journal. Brown, soft, faded along the corners. She opened it. Purple ink. Drawings of flowers pressed into the margins. Something about the handwriting made her pause. She turned the pages carefully. Most were blank, but a few were filled short entries. dates from long ago. The voice of someone young, observant, full of little details. Lila was the kind of person who noticed things. She snapped a photo of one of the entries and posted it online, writing, "Found the strangest, sweetest journal in a thrift shop." Anyone recognized this handwriting? She had no idea what she'd set in motion. The post spread fast, first through locals, then across wider circles. Within days, someone recognized the handwriting. Someone who remembered the missing girl from the flyers. Someone who still had one folded in a drawer. They tagged the Halley family. It was late evening when Grace's mother got the message. Her hands trembled as she clicked the image. The journal entry stared back at her, a story about a bird with a broken wing that Grace had once written in middle school. Word for word, it was hers. But it wasn't a copy, it was new. Her father drove to the shop first thing the next morning. The shop owner remembered the box had barely touched it before it was shelved. The tag on it was dated 3 weeks ago. The donor, no name, just a scribbled line on a form. A man, maybe mid-40s. Came in just before closing. Left quickly. They played the security tape. Grainy, out of focus, but the shape of his shoulders, the way he turned his head at the sound of the door, something about him was unsettling. He didn't look like someone donating books. He looked like someone running from something. And in the journal on the last page, Grace had written one sentence. "The walls here aren't real, but they're closing in." They stared at the journal for hours. Her mother ran her fingers across the ink, like it might smudge, like it was still drying. Her father didn't say anything at first. He just kept flipping through the pages again and again, looking for something he couldn't name. The last sentence haunted them both. "The walls here aren't real, but they're closing in." Where was Grace when she wrote that? How long ago? And how had her journal ended up in a thrift store 18 years later? The police reopened the case, though, quietly. They sent the journal to the lab, ran fingerprints. Grace's prints were confirmed on several pages. So were others' partials unidentifiable. Nothing that matched anyone in the system. The thrift store owner described the man again. Thin, medium height, nervous, paid in cash, kept his head down. Said he found the box cleaning out his uncle's attic. No address, no contact info, just gone. A detective followed up on old leads, revisiting names from the first investigation. One by one, they came up cold, except for one. Back in the original file, there had been a statement from a janitor at the middle school. He had reported seeing Grace talking to a man outside the school gate about a month before she vanished. Said he thought it was her dad at first, until he noticed the man was smoking. Grace's father didn't smoke. Never had. No one had followed up. It hadn't seemed important at the time. Now it did. They pulled yearbooks, scanned parking lot footage from what little survived on tape. Nothing conclusive. But then something else surfaced. The journal wasn't the only one. A woman in a neighboring town saw the news coverage. She worked at a used bookstore. Said a man had dropped off a leather-bound journal months earlier. She hadn't thought much of it. But when she opened it now and saw the handwriting, her stomach dropped. Purple ink, pressed flowers, same girl. The entries were different, more confused, more frantic. Some seemed lucid, others disjointed. In one entry, Grace wrote, "They say it's Tuesday, but it's not. I know, because the tree outside my window doesn't move." Another read, "She tells me not to scream, but I don't think she's real." Who was she? Was someone else there? Or was Grace losing her grip? Her mother cried, reading the pages. Her father looked like stone. They weren't just getting their daughter's words back. They were getting pieces of her fear. The second journal shook them more than the first. There was something different in Grace's handwriting. Tighter loops, sudden slants, like her hand had been trembling. Some pages were completely blank, except for a single phrase written over and over again. Find the yellow door. They didn't know what it meant, but it felt important. The police couldn't trace where the second journal came from either. The man who'd brought it in left no name, said he was clearing out a storage unit. The owner of the bookstore hadn't paid attention. She saw notebooks every day. But this one had been different. Heavy. Old. And she swore it smelled faintly like smoke and something else she couldn't name. Back at home, Grace's father dug out a photo album from the basement. He flipped to a picture from Grace's 10th birthday, a sleepover cake with pink icing, a dozen smiling girls. Behind them, barely visible, was a hallway, and at the very back, a closed door. Painted yellow, her father stared at it for a long time. He remembered the house. It belonged to one of Grace's friends, a girl named Eliza Purnell. They'd moved away not long after that photo was taken. It had been years, but something about that party stayed with him. He remembered Grace coming home quiet. Off. She didn't want to talk about it, her mother said softly when he brought it up. That night, he searched through old contacts and tracked down the Purnell family. They now lived in another state. Eliza was grown married with kids of her own. When he reached her by phone, there was a long silence on the line after he introduced himself. Then she said, "I was wondering when someone would call." He asked what she meant. "I didn't think it was my place," she said. "But I still have the tapes." Tapes, he repeated. She explained. Her parents had a security camera system installed in their home back then, old-fashioned, with VHS recordings. Her dad was paranoid, always worried about lawsuits or neighborhood crime. After the sleepover, he'd locked the tapes in the attic and forgotten about them. But Eliza hadn't. 2 years ago, when her parents moved into assisted living, she found the box again. She watched them out of curiosity. Then she saw something she couldn't explain. That night of Grace's birthday, around 2:30 in the morning, the camera in the upstairs hallway showed Grace leaving her sleeping bag and walking toward the yellow door at the end of the hall. She didn't knock. She just opened it and walked inside. The footage ended there. The next morning, Grace had told Eliza she didn't sleep well. She said she had weird dreams. Said someone whispered her name. Eliza didn't know what to say back then. She still didn't. She offered to send the tapes. Grace's father agreed. And as he waited for them to arrive, he started painting a corner of his workshop yellow. He didn't know why. The box arrived 3 days later, wrapped in layers of packing tape labeled in shaky handwriting, Halley Family Personal. Inside were 6 old VHS tapes, their spines marked with faded dates in red ink. Most were warped, too much time, too much heat. But one still played. They set up the old VCR in the living room, dusted off the TV, and pressed play. The image was grainy. The time stamp flickered. August 17th, 2005, 2:31 a.m. Grace appeared in frame, stepping quietly down the hallway in her pajamas. She walked past 2 closed doors, then stopped at the yellow one. She didn't hesitate. She opened it and slipped inside. The door closed. Then, nothing. The tape kept rolling. 30 minutes of silence, the empty hallway frozen in black and white static. At minute 33:07, the door creaked open again, but no one came out. Her mother gasped. Her father leaned forward, eyes narrowing. There was movement barely perceptible, a shadow perhaps, or a figure too fast for the low-resolution camera. something that didn't make sense. Then the screen glitched, and the tape ended. They rewound it, watched it again, and again. Always the same. Grace walked in. No one walked out. That night, her mother sat on the couch, holding the tape to her chest like it was a heartbeat. Her father stayed in the garage, staring at the newly painted yellow door, leaning against the wall half-finished. The next morning, the phone rang. It was the detective assigned to Grace's case. He had news. One of the fingerprints from the second journal had just been matched to a man in Ohio. His name was Walter Lane, age 52, former school custodian. He had a record nothing violent, just trespassing and psychiatric holds. He'd vanished 10 years earlier. But here's the strange part. Walter Lane used to work at Melrose Middle School. He quit 3 weeks before Grace disappeared, and when police visited his last known address, the neighbors said something odd. They remembered him well. They remembered the yellow door, because he used to carry a piece of it with him, a splintered wooden plank, painted bright canary yellow, always tucked under his arm like a briefcase. They said he used to whisper to it, said it was where the girl lived now. It just felt right. The box arrived 3 days later, wrapped in layers of packing tape, labeled in shaky handwriting, Halley Family Personal. Inside were 6 old VHS tapes, their spines marked with faded dates in red ink. Most were warped too much time, too much heat. But one still played. They set up the old VCR in the living room, dusted off the TV, and pressed play. The image was grainy. The timestamp flickered. August 17th, 2005, 2:31 a.m. Grace appeared in frame, stepping quietly down the hallway in her pajamas. She walked past 2 closed doors, then stopped at the yellow one. She didn't hesitate. She opened it and slipped inside. The door closed. Then, nothing. The tape kept rolling. 30 minutes of silence, the empty hallway frozen in black and white static. At minute 33:07, the door creaked open again, but no one came out. Her mother gasped. Her father leaned forward, eyes narrowing. There was movement barely perceptible, a shadow perhaps, or a figure too fast for the low-resolution camera, something that didn't make sense. Then the screen glitched, and the tape ended. They rewound it, watched it again, and again. Always the same. Grace walked in. No one walked out. That night, her mother sat on the couch, holding the tape to her chest like it was a heartbeat. Her father stayed in the garage, staring at the newly painted yellow door, leaning against the wall, half-finished. The next morning, the phone rang. It was the detective assigned to Grace's case. He had news. One of the fingerprints from the second journal had just been matched to a man in Ohio. His name was Walter Lane, age 52, former school custodian. He had a record nothing violent, just trespassing and psychiatric holds. He'd vanished 10 years earlier. But here's the strange part. Walter Lane used to work at Melrose Middle School. He quit 3 weeks before Grace disappeared. And when police visited his last known address, the neighbors said something odd. They remembered him well. They remembered the yellow door, because he used to carry a piece of it with him, a splintered wooden plank, painted bright canary yellow, always tucked under his arm like a briefcase. They said he used to whisper to it, said it was where the girl lived now. Here is the continuation of For Part 9 Mahert, written in fluent American English. The police didn't find Walter Lane. They found what was left of his last known residence, a one-room cabin deep in the woods of central Ohio, long since abandoned. Overgrown vines had wrapped themselves around the front door. The windows were shattered. The inside smelled of mildew and old smoke. But there was something stranger. In the center of the room stood a doorframe, freestanding, no walls, just a single yellow-painted door with rusted hinges nailed into a wooden platform like a stage prop. There were scratch marks around the handle, like someone had tried to open it from the inside. And carved into the top of the frame, faint but deliberate, were the words, "Room 17 belongs to her now." Room 17. It meant nothing to the officers who found it. But when the detective told Grace's mother, she nearly collapsed. Room 17 had been the old art room at Melrose Middle School, the room where Grace spent her free periods writing in her journal and listening to music through a pair of borrowed headphones. The room no longer existed. It was converted into a storage closet the year after she disappeared. They went back. The school had changed. The halls were brighter, repainted in cheerful blues. But the space where room 17 once was still held a certain hush. The janitor unlocked the closet door, revealing shelves of broken projectors, plastic tubs of lost and found items, faded science fair boards, and behind one of the cabinets, a piece of yellow-painted wood, old, cracked, but unmistakably part of a door. Grace's father touched it with his bare hand. It was warm. No one said anything for a long time. Back at home, her mother found herself flipping through Grace's first journal again. She read a page that had never made sense to her until now. There's a place between the pages. You fall into it when no one's looking. The walls are soft. The door is yellow. I think I've been here before. The phrasing was strange, almost poetic, dreamlike. But now it felt like a map. That night, she dreamed of Grace. Not the child she remembered, but a version older, standing on the other side of a door they couldn't open. Grace didn't speak. She just placed a hand against the glass pane and mouthed something, "Find the rest of me." She woke up shaking, and for the first time in years, her husband held her hand without needing a reason. Here is the continuation of Unity, Part 10, written in natural, emotionally resonant American English. They didn't talk much the next morning. There was a quiet understanding between them. Now something had shifted. The journals, the tapes, the door. All of it pointed towards something they didn't have a name for. But it felt like Grace was still reaching out. They returned to the school that afternoon. This time they asked to be alone with the old storage closet room 17. The janitor was hesitant, but eventually agreed. He handed them the key and shuffled off down the hallway, muttering something about not wanting to be near that room after dark. Inside, the air was still. Dust floated like snow in the sunlight cutting through the high window. The smell of old paper and forgotten things lingered. Her father pulled the shelving unit away from the wall again. They both stared at the yellow wooden plank embedded into the baseboard. He knelt beside it, pressed his palm flat. It pulsed, not with heat, not with sound, but with something else like the thinnest hum of memory. Her mother stepped back, eyes watering. "This room," she whispered. "She lived in this room. She breathed in here. She wrote in here." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Grace's first journal. Then she did something strange. She placed it gently on the floor next to the yellow plank and waited. A minute passed, 2. Nothing happened. But then the pages began to flutter, not from wind. The room was sealed. No air moved. Just a slow, deliberate rustle, like fingers flipping forward through memories. The journal stopped on a blank page, and there, in violet ink that hadn't been there before, were 5 words. "I never made it home." Her mother fell to her knees. Her father backed into the corner, one hand over his mouth. She touched the ink. It didn't smear. It was real. They left the room in a daze. Neither of them spoke during the ride home. That night, her father went into the garage, pulled out the yellow door he'd been painting, and screwed it into the frame he'd built. He sat in front of it for hours just staring. Then, just before dawn, he opened it, and there behind it was nothing, just the wall. But something cold passed through him. Not air, not fear, memory. He closed the door slowly, locked it, and for the first time in years, he whispered to himself, "She's still out there." Here is the continuation of Part 11, written in cinematic and emotionally resonant American English. The next day, her mother went back to the thrift store where the first journal had been found. She stood in the aisle where it was discovered, scanning every spine, every torn cover, as if Grace might have left her another message hidden in the clutter. Nothing. Still, she bought an old book with blank pages just in case. That night, she placed it on the kitchen table and left a pen beside it. In the morning, the first page had writing. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Grace's either. It was a scrawl. Jagged, urgent. Stop looking. The door is locked for a reason. Her heart thudded in her chest. She showed her husband. He stared at the message, then crossed the room to the yellow door he'd mounted in the garage. He touched the knob. Cold, still locked, still just a door. They debated calling the police, but what could they say? That their missing daughter was writing in ghost ink, that a door in their garage was somehow connected to a journal in a second-hand shop. No. Instead, they turned to someone else. There was a woman in town who people whispered about Mrs. Marrow. She was old, strange, quiet, lived near the woods and talked to birds. Some called her a medium. Others called her crazy. But the Halleys had nothing left to lose. Mrs. Marrow arrived that evening just before dusk. She was dressed in a shawl that shimmered when the light hit it, and she carried a worn leather satchel that smelled of dried lavender and something older earth maybe. She didn't ask many questions. She walked straight to the yellow door, rested her palm against it, then whispered, "It's not a door. It's a wound." She turned to Grace's parents. "She isn't gone. She's in between." In between what her father asked. Places, moments, maybe lives. Mrs. Marrow opened her bag and pulled out a small round mirror. She held it up to the door, angling it until the light caught the surface just right. Then they saw it, a reflection that wasn't theirs. A girl's face, pale, wide-eyed, mouth open, like she was trying to scream. But no sound came out. Grace, then gone. Her mother collapsed into the chair. Her father stared at the door, jaw clenched. Mrs. Marrow lowered the mirror. "She's trapped, but she's trying." She turned to the mother. "Do you still have the last thing she ever touched?" She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her scarf. "Bring it tomorrow," Mrs. Marrow said, "and be ready." Here is the continuation of Part 12. Seamlessly told in cinematic American English. The next evening, as twilight wrapped itself around the Holly home, her mother retrieved Grace's scarf from the cedar chest beneath their bed. It still smelled faintly of her lavender shampoo and old autumn wind. Mrs. Marrow returned just before dark, carrying candles, a small brass bowl, and something wrapped in red cloth. She moved through the house without a word, as if she'd lived there once in another lifetime. They gathered in the garage. The yellow door stood like an accusation in the corner. Mrs. Marrow lit the candles in a circle around it, placed the bowl at its base, and opened the red cloth to reveal an old photograph weathered and curled at the edges. It showed a little girl, standing alone in a field, her back to the camera, looking toward the tree line. The resemblance to Grace was uncanny. "She isn't gone," Mrs. Merrow said softly, "but she isn't whole." Her mother stepped forward and laid the scarf gently into the bowl. Mrs. Merrow nodded. That was her tether. Then she took a small vial from her pocket, unscrewed the cap, and let a single drop of deep blue oil fall onto the scarf. The smell of it hit instantly jasmine and iron, memory, and something older. Mrs. Merrow closed her eyes and began to hum. It wasn't a melody exactly, more like a vibration, ancient and untraceable. The candles flickered, though no wind passed. The light bent strangely. Time itself felt slower. Then, without warning, the yellow door creaked open. Only an inch, but enough. From within, a chill poured out, the kind of cold that doesn't touch your skin, but settles in your bones. The kind of cold that remembers you. Her mother stepped forward instinctively. Mrs. Merrow's voice sliced through the stillness. "Not yet." And then a voice called out, faint, muffled, but undeniably Grace's. "I'm here." Her mother dropped to her knees. "Grace." No answer. Just silence. Mrs. Merrow placed a hand on the door. Her expression suddenly dark. "She's not alone in there." The room fell deathly quiet. Her father reached for his wife, but she was frozen, tears falling silently. "Something followed her," Mrs. Merrow whispered, "and it doesn't want to let her go." The candles blew out at once. The door slammed shut. The scarf in the bowl had turned to ash. No one spoke for a long time. And then Mrs. Merrow said something they never forgot. "She's alive, but not in the way you understand it. If you want her back," she looked straight at Grace's mother, "you'll have to go where she is." Here is the continuation of mine, part 13. In the same emotionally rich, cinematic American English style. The next morning, the house felt different, as if it were holding its breath. Her father moved through the rooms, slowly, every footstep an echo. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, staring at her coffee, as if it might whisper something back. The yellow door remained closed. Nothing happened through the night. No voices, no flickering lights, no dreams. Mrs. Merrow had left them with a warning. The door won't open again until someone inside wants to come out, or someone outside chooses to go in. That day, Grace's mother couldn't stop thinking about the journals. She pulled them all out, every page Grace had ever written in. She read them not as a grieving parent, but as someone looking for a map. And in those pages, buried beneath thoughts about school and music and clouds, she found patterns, mentions of locked rooms, colors that didn't belong, references to being watched in places no one else noticed, and one line that sent a chill through her spine. "If I get lost, follow the sound of water and wait for the door to hum." She showed it to her husband. He didn't say anything. He simply got up, walked to the garage, and stood in front of the yellow door. He whispered, like a prayer. Nothing. But then, ever so faint, a low vibration passed through the floor. He stepped back. "It's her," he said. "She's trying again." That night, Mrs. Merrow returned. This time, she brought a small vial of dark soil and a bundle of lavender wrapped in string. She spread the soil in a line across the threshold of the door. "This comes from where she was taken," she said. "The earth remembers." She then set the lavender beside it and whispered in a language neither of them recognized. Not foreign, older. The candles flickered again. The door trembled, then opened, this time wider. Beyond it, there wasn't a wall. There was a hallway, dim, gray, seemingly endless. It pulsed with an energy that felt both magnetic and ancient. Mrs. Merrow turned to them. She's waiting, but she's not the only thing in there. Grace's mother took a step forward. Her husband caught her wrist. Are you sure? She looked at him, eyes rimmed with years of grief. She was 13, she whispered, and she was alone. I won't let her stay alone. And with that, she stepped through the door. It closed behind her with a soft click. The candles went out, and the garage was silent once again. Oh, here is the continuation of Part 14, written in seamless, cinematic American English. At first, it was like walking into a memory, but not her own. The hallway behind the yellow door stretched far too long to belong to their house. The wallpaper was peeling the floorboards, warped and creaking underfoot. The air smelled faintly of rain dust and something sweeter, lavender maybe, but not fresh. Dried. Preserved. Grace's mother walked slowly, one hand brushing against the wall, the other clutched to her chest. The silence pressed in from all sides, thick and pulsing. She could feel the thud of her own heartbeat in her ears. Then came the sound, dripping, water, somewhere far ahead. She remembered Grace's line from the journal. Follow the sound of water and wait for the door to hum. The hallway seemed to curve, the more she walked, like a ribbon twisting on itself. Shadows didn't behave the way they should. They moved slightly, as if breathing. She passed a mirror hanging sideways on the wall. Her reflection didn't move. She kept walking. Then she found it, a small wooden door. Not yellow. White, but chipped and stained with something dark near the bottom. The handle looked rusted over. She reached out, but before she could touch it, she heard it. A hum, low and resonant, like a deep note played on a string. Then came the whisper, Mom. Her breath caught. Grace. The door creaked. Slowly, slowly, it opened inward. Inside was a room that didn't belong to any house. It was dimly lit by a single hanging bulb. The floor was made of stone. There were books stacked in the corners, her journals, dozens of them, all filled with writing. Pages upon pages of thoughts, fears, dreams. Some pages written in violet ink, some in pencil, others in charcoal like she'd run out of everything else. And there in the middle of it all was Grace, older, but unmistakably her. She looked up, startled. You're not supposed to be here. Her mother fell to her knees. Grace, baby. No, Grace shook her head, backing away. You can't stay. He doesn't like visitors. Who? Her mother asked, her voice cracking. Who's keeping you here? But Grace's eyes shifted to the far corner of the room, and for the first time, her mother saw it, a shadow darker than the rest. Not shaped like a man, not shaped like anything. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Grace stepped back. He listens when you say my name. The shadow moved. Don't say it again, she whispered. Please. Her mother nodded, tears falling silently. She held out her hand instead. Grace hesitated, then slowly, so slowly, took a step forward. The room began to shake. The light above flickered. The shadow unfurled. And then a scream. Not Grace. Not her mother. Something else. Something primal. The walls cracked, and just before everything went white, Grace's hand reached hers. Flesh and blood. Warm, real. Here is the final chapter. Part 15. Told in a complete cinematic American storytelling style. Ew. She woke up on the garage floor. The yellow door was gone, vanished frame and all. Only the outline remained scorched faintly into the drywall like a ghost that had finally moved on. She sat up, chest heaving. Her hands were scraped, her head pounding. But something was in her arms, warm, breathing. Grace, 13. just as she was the day she disappeared, still wearing the same uniform, still clutching that violet journal. Her hair smelled like lavender, and her eyes, they were filled with tears. I was so cold, she whispered. I thought I was going to forget everything. Her mother held her tighter, rocking back and forth the way she had when Grace was little and afraid of thunderstorms. Her father burst into the garage moments later, the shock on his face breaking into disbelief, then awe, then something wordless. They wrapped her in blankets, called no one. Not yet. There was no explanation that would make sense. Not to police, not to neighbors, not even to themselves. So for the first 24 hours, they just sat together, ate soup, watched cartoons. Let the silence between them be soft instead of terrifying. When Grace finally slept, her hand still curled around her mother's wrist, her parents sat at the kitchen table in the half-light. She remembers everything her mother whispered. I know her father said, and not just where she was. She remembers things from before, things we forgot. The way her grandfather whistled when he made pancakes. The crack in the sidewalk she used to pretend was a river. He nodded, rubbing his face. She came back with more than just herself. They didn't ask what happened in the hallway, or what the shadow really was, or why the door had chosen now. Some things weren't meant to be explained. Some things just were. But a week later, something strange happened. The mail arrived as usual, but tucked between two grocery store flyers was a small square package. No return address. Inside it, a journal, violet ink. The first page read, if you're reading this, it means the door found you too. Don't run from it. Just listen. Not everything lost stays gone, and not every shadow is there to hurt you. They didn't know who sent it, but Grace smiled when she saw it, as if she already knew. That night, she placed it on her windowsill, and the wind turned the first page all on its own.